On a raging winter night in the Rocky Mountains, Emily, a lone forest ranger, carried home a freezing mountain lion cub that had only minutes left to live. She couldn't know that this choice would unleash a chain of events no one could explain. Her two Rottweilers didn't just accept the cub. They defended it, raised it, and treated it as one of their own. But the real danger began when the wolves returned, and Rhea gave birth to 4 tiny puppies. In that terrifying moment, one question hung in the air. Would Aspen choose instinct or choose family? The wind came first, low, mournful, rolling down the Rocky Mountains like a warning whispered through the pines. Then came the snow, thick and heavy, swallowing the landscape in white silence. Ranger Emily Carter eased her truck along the narrow service road, headlights cutting a thin path through the storm. She had responded to reports of an injured mule deer near the ridge, the kind of routine call she handled even in dangerous weather. But tonight felt different. The forest held its breath. Even the radio static sounded uneasy, like the mountain itself knew something was wrong. She nearly missed the sound at first, a thin, breaking cry carried on the wind. Not the cry of a deer, not the bark of a fox. Softer, smaller, desperate. Emily killed the engine, stepped out, and the cold hit her with the bite of 1,000 needles. She cupped her hands around her ears, listening. There it was again, a weak, high-pitched mew that didn't belong in a blizzard capable of freezing a grown man in minutes. Every instinct she had honed through years of mountain rescue and wildlife care told her something was dying out there. She pushed forward, boots sinking deep into drifts as the storm clawed at her coat. The beam of her flashlight danced across boulders, fallen branches, frosted brush. And then it stopped. A tiny shape, barely moving, curled against the base of a rock like a scrap of forgotten fur. Emily dropped to her knees. It wasn't fur, it was a mountain lion cub, no more than 3 weeks old. Its paws were stiff with cold, its whiskers crusted in ice, breath shallow enough to vanish between heartbeats. Abandonment wasn't uncommon among big cats. If a cub was injured or fell behind, the mother made a brutal choice. Save the strong, leave the weak. Nature's version of personal injury law, swift, merciless, and final. But this cub didn't even have the strength to protest when Emily lifted it. One hind leg was torn, a bite mark near the joint. A predator had gotten to it first, and lived long enough to scare the mother and the rest of the litter away. "You poor thing," Emily whispered, pressing it closer to her chest for warmth. The cub trembled once, just once, and fell still again. She knew the regulations. Rangers weren't supposed to intervene unless human activity caused the injury. It was the policy, the same way an accident attorney had rules about what cases they could take. But Emily also knew what would happen if she walked away. The cub wouldn't last another hour. Some choices aren't procedural, they're moral. She wrapped it inside her jacket and started back toward the truck, pushing against the wind. Halfway there, she froze. 2 pale shapes hovered on the ridge above her, eyes reflecting her flashlight, unblinking, deliberate. Wolves. One large, one smaller, both watching her with a hunger sharpened by winter scarcity. Emily's grip tightened around the cub. The wolves didn't charge, but they didn't retreat either. They simply followed her with their gaze, pacing the ridge as she moved. They knew what she was carrying. They knew how vulnerable she was. It wasn't until she slammed the truck door shut that the tension broke. The larger wolf stepped closer to the ridge's edge, snow swirling around its frame like smoke. Not attacking, just watching, remembering, waiting. Emily started the engine with shaking hands and drove toward her cabin, whispering a steadying breath as the heater groaned to life. The cub stirred faintly against her chest, a reminder that she had made a choice that might change everything. A choice that might put her at risk, much like signing a mortgage on a home perched against the unpredictable wilderness. "Hang on," she murmured. We're almost there." Outside, the storm raged, yet inside her jacket, a fragile heartbeat pushed on. And somewhere behind them, unseen among the swirling snow, the wolves continued to follow the truck's tracks down the mountain. They weren't done with her, and they definitely weren't done with the cub. The storm had eased by the time Emily reached her cabin, but the cold still clung to the world like a punishment. Her truck light swept across the porch where two silhouettes waited, broad, unmoving, alert. Brutus and Rhea had sensed the danger long before she pulled in. That was the thing about Rottweilers. They didn't need alarms, and they certainly didn't need permission to defend what they considered theirs. Emily stepped out, keeping the jacket wrapped tightly around the mountain lion cub. Brutus was the first to move. His heavy frame descended the steps with slow, deliberate force, each step a question. His breath steamed in the air as he approached her, nose lifted, reading every scent that clung to her coat, the smell of blood, of fear, of wolf. And something else, something fragile and unfamiliar, a predator, but also a baby. "Easy, boy," Emily murmured. "Easy now." Brutus didn't look away. His dark eyes locked onto the bulge inside her jacket, and a deep rumble started low in his chest. Not a bark, not a warning. Something older. A reminder that even the gentlest dog carries a shadow of the world it came from. Rhea appeared beside him, smaller and softer, but with a gaze just as sharp. Her head tilted. She took a step closer, and another. Emily slowly opened her jacket. The cub didn't move at first. Snowmelt had soaked its fur, and its breaths came thin as paper. Only when Rhea leaned in did it stir, lifting its head a fraction. Its nose twitched. It made the faintest broken sound, something between a mew and a plea. Brutus stiffened. His rumble deepened, vibrating through the wooden porch. He knew exactly what kind of creature Emily had brought home. Mountain lions weren't neighbors. They were apex predators, capable of ending a life with one strike. And even in its smallness, Brutus recognized the shape of future danger. His instincts told him this was wrong. His loyalty told him to protect Emily from whatever threat she had carried through the storm. But Rhea stepped past him. Emily didn't move, hardly breathed, as the female Rottweiler pressed her nose to the cub's cheek. She inhaled once, twice. Then, with the certainty of a mother who understood vulnerability better than any ranger handbook, she licked the cub's face. Gentle, slow, cleaning away a crust of ice that clung below its eye. Brutus's growl stopped mid-breath. Something shifted in that moment. Rhea pulled back, tail swaying in a slow, thoughtful arc, not wagging exactly, but signaling a decision older than any training. The cub blinked up at her and reached its tiny paw toward her muzzle, as if asking for the warmth it had been denied on the mountain. Emily exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "All right," she whispered. "Let's get inside." Inside the cabin, warmth from the wood stove wrapped around them like a blanket. Emily laid the cub onto the thick rug near the fire, rubbing its sides until it began to breathe more steadily. She prepared formula, antibiotics, everything a recovering animal might need, supplies she kept for emergencies and search and rescue cases. Still, she kept glancing toward the window, checking the darkness beyond the trees. She couldn't shake the feeling that the wolves were still out there, tracking, waiting, remembering the scent she carried away from that ridge. Brutus stayed between Emily and the door, pacing in deliberate circuits, ears pricked toward every sound the wind dragged across the cabin walls. Rhea remained near the cub, lying on her side so her warmth radiated toward its trembling body. It wasn't long before the cub inched closer, pressing into her fur the way abandoned infants seek comfort without knowing why. Emily watched the three of them, her steadfast protectors, and this wild, broken creature, and felt the strangeness of the moment settle into her bones. She had worked in wildlife rehabilitation for years, dealt with everything from orphaned elk calves to trapped black bear cubs, but mountain lions were different. They didn't just live in the wild. They were the wild. Their instincts shaped the ecosystem around them. They didn't submit, didn't bend, didn't surrender. And yet here one lay, breathing shallowly against the flank of a dog who had decided it was worth protecting. An hour passed. Then 2. The storm quieted outside. The cub slept, its breaths no longer frantic. Brutus eventually came to lie in the space between Emily and the door, the same way he always did when he sensed a long night ahead. Rhea kept her head resting near the cub, lifting it only when the fire crackled too loud or the wind scraped a branch across the roof. "Looks like we've got ourselves a situation," Emily said softly, though the dogs didn't need words to understand her tone. She was a ranger, sworn to respect the rules that kept humans and wildlife at safe distance. She was a caretaker, responsible for any creature brought under her shelter. She was a woman alone on a mountain with 2 loyal dogs, and now a predator whose kind had never been meant to live under a human roof. But love and danger share borders thinner than snow. Emily reached down, brushing a finger across the cub's ear. "You'll live," she whispered. "I won't let you freeze. Not tonight." Brutus lifted his head at her words, eyes narrowing toward the door again. For a moment, Emily thought he was reacting to the sound of shifting ice. But then she heard it, the faintest crunch of snow outside. Slow, measured, not the wind, not the storm. Something was moving just beyond the porch. Brutus growled once, low and steady, the kind of growl that made the hair rise on the back of Emily's neck. She set her hand on his shoulder, steadying herself as much as him. She knew that sound. She had heard it on rescue calls, on nights when danger wasn't a concept, but a presence. The wolves hadn't given up. They had followed her all the way home, and now they knew exactly where the cub was. The wolves did not try to break in that night, but their presence lingered like a cold draft beneath the cabin door. Emily barely slept. Every time the wood creaked or the wind shifted, Brutus lifted his head, listening with the instincts of a dog who had spent years guarding a woman who lived alone in a wilderness where danger didn't knock. It prowled. Rhea stayed close to the mountain lion cub, her breath warm and steady against its tiny ribs. Emily watched them for long stretches, unable to shake the strange mixture of fear and tenderness swelling inside her. By dawn, the storm had passed, but the sky remained heavy with quiet. Emily checked Aspen, the name she had decided on sometime between midnight and the moment the cub first tried to bury its nose into Rhea's fur. His breathing was shallow but stronger. His injured leg twitched when she touched it, a good sign. She warmed formula on the stove, something she had done for countless orphaned animals, though never one like this. Aspen tried to drink, his mouth small and clumsy around the bottle, but determination flickered in him. He wanted to live. Sometimes that was the only medicine that mattered. When he finished, he let out a rough, tiny sound that might have been contentment, then slumped against Rhea's flank again. Rhea cleaned his face as though he were her own, then curled her paw protectively around his back. Brutus, who had guarded the door all night, finally moved closer. He sniffed Aspen from a careful distance, his expression torn somewhere between suspicion and reluctant acceptance. He gave a soft grunt, then lay down on Aspen's other side, forming a barrier with his body that no cold draft or passing threat could slip through. Emily cracked a tired smile. "All right," she murmured. "You two are surprising me." The first day blurred into the second. Aspen slept often, waking only long enough to feed or blink groggily at the shapes around him. Emily administered antibiotics and cleaned the bite wound on his hind leg, tracing the outline of the teeth that had sunk into him. The jaw width matched what she had suspected. Not a cougar, not a bobcat, a wolf. possibly one of the pair she had seen following her. The realization sent a chill through her, deeper than the winter air. The wolves hadn't simply been curious, they had unfinished business. Still, inside the cabin, life took on a quieter rhythm. Rhea's maternal instincts deepened with every hour. Aspen responded to her presence like a misplaced puzzle piece finally fitting somewhere warm. Brutus, though slower to trust, began tolerating Aspen's awkward attempts to reach for him. When the cub tried to crawl onto his front paw, Brutus shot Emily a look that seemed to say, "This is your doing," but he didn't move the paw away. It was the first hint that something extraordinary was forming, a structure, a hierarchy not written by nature, but built inside a small cabin on the edge of the Rockies. On the third morning, Aspen's eyes opened fully. Gold, muted by fever, but unmistakably lion gold. He blinked up at Emily, then at the dogs, his gaze lingering longest on Rhea. She lowered her head and bumped her nose gently against his forehead. Aspen tried to mimic the gesture, but overbalanced and toppled sideways. Brutus huffed. Rhea licked the cub back upright. Aspen sneezed once, then waddled toward a patch of sunlight spilling across the rug. The moment should have been peaceful. But outside, Rhea's ears twitched at a distant howl. Emily stiffened. She walked to the window, but saw only long shadows stretching between the pines. Still, the call echoed again, faint, but close enough that Brutus rose instantly, muscles taut. "They're still around," Emily whispered. She knew wolves didn't give up easily. They remembered scents, patterns. They returned to places where food had been taken from them, and a helpless cub, injured, slow, smelling of milk and medicine, was an irresistible target. Emily checked her tranquilizer rifle, the same one she used during rescue operations or when frightened tourists got too close to wildlife. She didn't want to use it, especially not on predators just trying to survive winter. But she knew the wolves wouldn't hesitate if the opportunity came. Around midday, Aspen tried to climb onto Rhea's back. She tolerated the first attempt, then the second, but on the third, when his tiny claws caught her fur too sharply, she let out a firm bark straight into his face. Aspen froze, ears flattening. He blinked up at her in shock, then lowered his head and tucked his chin in a posture of instinctive submission. It was the first lesson taught the first way all pack mothers teach: discipline with love. Brutus watched, tail tapping once against the floor. Approval, silent but certain. From then on, Aspen seemed more careful. When he bumped into Brutus or tried gnawing on the corner of a boot, the big dog corrected him with a deep of disapproval. Aspen responded quickly, adjusting himself to the rules of the household with surprising grace. Emily took notes in her logbook, a habit from her wildlife rehabilitation work, but she found herself writing more than behavioral observations. She wrote about feelings, about the delicate way Aspen leaned on Rhea when he grew tired, about the strange tenderness that softened Brutus's stern guard dog demeanor. Yet beneath these early steps of bonding, a tension threaded through the days. At dusk, one of the wolves appeared again, standing just beyond the tree line. Emily spotted it through the kitchen window, a dark silhouette half hidden among the aspens, staring directly at the cabin. She stepped out onto the porch, heart pounding, but the wolf didn't move. It simply watched. The message was clear as any lawsuit warning or insurance claim: what you took belongs to us. Brutus took 2 steps forward, his growl steady and cold. "Zapai?" The wolf tilted its head, almost amused, then turned and vanished into the timber. As night settled in, Emily added more firewood to the stove. Rhea curled herself protectively around Aspen, humming a soft canine rumble that seemed to quiet the cub into sleep. Brutus positioned himself by the door again, his ears alert even in rest. Emily sat at the table, rubbing her temples. She thought about the risk she had taken, about the fragile life now depending entirely on her. She thought about the wolves and how hunger made enemies out of creatures simply trying to live. She thought about Aspen's tiny heartbeat, steadying day by day, and wondered what he might become, what all this might cost when that tiny creature grew into the powerful predator nature intended him to be. But when Aspen stirred and pressed his small face into Rhea's chest, letting out a tiny sigh of trust, Emily felt something settle deep inside her. Maybe she had brought danger into her home. Maybe she had broken the rules, meant to keep people safe. But she had also saved a life. And somehow, in the quiet glow of the cabin, that felt like the one right choice she could have made. Outside, snow fell again in slow, drifting flakes. The wolves were out there somewhere, watching, waiting. But inside the cabin, wrapped in warmth and unlikely companionship, Aspen survived another day. Another chance, another breath. It was more than he'd had on that frozen ridge, and for now, it was enough. Winter mornings on the Rockies had a way of fooling the senses. The sky could shine clean and blue, the pines heavy with softened snow, and yet beneath that calm, the wilderness held its quiet negotiations of life and death. Emily stepped outside with a mug of coffee, watching her breath drift upward in pale clouds. Inside the cabin, Aspen was awake and restless, padding clumsily around Rhea, while Brutus supervised with stern patience. The cub had grown fast, too fast for comfort. His limbs were still awkward, but his strength was beginning to show in the way he pushed himself upright, the way his tail flicked when something stirred his curiosity. Emily set the mug down and opened the door wider. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's get you into the sunlight." Aspen bounded toward her, stumbling over his own paws, Rhea close behind to keep him from face-planting into the snow. Brutus followed last, but with the authority of a guardian who believed every creature on this mountain needed clearance to approach his family. The sunlight hit Aspen's fur, and for a moment he looked almost silver against the snow, a tiny ghost of the mountain lion he would one day become. He lifted his head, sniffing the cold air with new awareness. The world outside the cabin was louder, sharper, filled with smells Emily knew he was reading in ways she couldn't imagine. Pine sap, cold earth, deer tracks, and something darker beneath it all. Instinct was waking in him, not dangerous yet, but insistent. Even Rhea noticed it, her tail lowered a fraction, and she nudged him back when he stared too long at a drifting magpie overhead. Emily walked them to the clearing beside the cabin, a safe patch she used for training sessions with the dogs. Aspen chased after Rhea, attempting to mimic her movements, but his paws slid on the snow and sent him tumbling. Brutus barked once in amusement. Aspen responded by pouncing toward him, too boldly for the first time. Emily saw it before it happened, the lift of Aspen's shoulders, the twitch of his claws, the spark of challenge that mountain lions were born carrying. Brutus didn't move until the last second. When Aspen lunged, the big Rottweiler shifted his weight, stepped into the cub's path, and let out a sound that wasn't quite a growl, but wasn't just a warning either. Aspen froze mid-pounce, paws skidding. The cub looked up, confused, as Brutus towered over him. No teeth, no bite, just authority. Aspen's ears flattened, and he slowly lowered himself to the ground, belly pressed into snow. Submission. Rhea circled once, touched her nose to Aspen's ear, and the tension melted just as quickly as it had formed. It was a moment that took only seconds, but it etched itself deeply into Emily's thoughts. Aspen was learning, yes, but he was also growing into something that would one day outweigh both dogs combined. Learning now was survival later. As she approached, a sudden flutter of wings burst from the trees. 3 crows rose in a noisy scatter, and Aspen's head snapped toward the movement with eerie precision. His pupils widened. His body stilled. Something ancient shivered through his posture, a whisper of instinct that belonged entirely to the predator species he came from. "Aspen," Emily called gently. He didn't respond. He took a step forward, another, his body lowering in a juvenile crouch. The crows cawed again, mocking him from the branches. Brutus moved first, stepping in front of Aspen, blocking his path. Aspen blinked, once, twice, then looked up at the older dog with a confused, almost pleading expression. His instinct had pulled him one way, but Brutus pulled him back. Emily felt a knot in her stomach. The balance they kept was delicate, and a day would come when instinct pushed harder than discipline. A day when Aspen's body would no longer match the softness of his intentions. She tried to steady herself, reminding her heart of something she'd learned in wildlife rehabilitation and countless legal consultations about liability and home protection rights. Fear rarely solved anything. Understanding did. She knelt beside Aspen and cupped his chin. "Not everything that moves is yours to chase," she whispered. Aspen nuzzled her hand, letting out a tiny rumbling sound that wasn't a purr, but leaned toward one. Brutus nudged him once more before returning to his patrol-like stance. As afternoon shadows stretched across the clearing, Rhea stiffened suddenly. Her head snapped toward the tree line. Brutus followed, ears pinned, posture alert. Aspen sensed it too. He pressed against Rhea's leg, his newly awakened instincts turning inward into tension. Emily stepped forward, peering into the dense pines. Two shapes emerged, silent and confident, their breath curling in the fading light. Wolves. The same pair she had seen on the ridge. Their presence was not accidental. Wolves did not risk approaching humans unless driven by starvation or opportunity. And Emily instantly understood which it was. They wanted the cub back. Injury or not, Aspen had been prey they nearly claimed before she carried him away. Brutus blocked the path to the cabin, shoulders wide, head low. A warning. Rhea positioned herself behind him, pushing Aspen backward with her hip. The wolves did not charge. They paced, slow and circling, assessing the land, assessing weaknesses. Emily could feel their intelligence, that uncanny focus predators carried when hunger narrowed every instinct into intent. One of the wolves stared directly at Aspen. A deep primal recognition crackled between species. Aspen trembled, not with fear, but with an instinct that didn't yet have shape. Emily backed toward the porch, her hand on the tranquilizer rifle she'd left leaning by the door earlier. She wasn't a hunter. She didn't want to harm the very animals she was sworn to protect. But responsibility worked like a contract. She had chosen to bring Aspen into her care, and that choice made her accountable for the risks that followed. Snow crunched, not from her, from the wolves. Brutus stepped forward, placing himself squarely in their path. Rhea growled, a rare, sharp warning reserved for true danger. Aspen let out a tiny, confused sound, caught between instinctive awe and the fear pressing into his small ribs. The wolves tested their distance, pacing sideways. But Brutus didn't flinch. His stance was firm, unwavering, as though he weighed twice what he did. His bark shattered the quiet, echoing through the clearing like a signal flare. The wolves halted. Their ears twitched, their bodies tensed. Then they turned, not in retreat, but in calculation. They moved back into the woods with slow precision, as if promising they would return when the odds shifted. When the world exhaled again, Emily felt her knees weaken. She crouched and gathered Aspen into her arms. He clung to her jacket, burying his face in the warmth that had saved him once already. Brutus pressed against her side, still bristling, still listening for the return of danger. Inside the cabin, Aspen paced restlessly before settling near the stove. His movements were different now, more aware, more alert, as though something inside him had opened after seeing the wolves. Emily tended to his leg again, but his mind was elsewhere. She could feel it. Instinct wasn't something that could be medicated or trained out. It lived in blood and bone, and tonight it had spoken to him louder than any lesson Brutus or Rhea had taught. Still, as he curled beside Rhea, fitting perfectly into the curve of her belly, Emily felt hope bloom again. He wasn't dangerous, not yet, not with the two dogs who steadied him like anchors in a vast, unpredictable sea. Outside, the last howl of the day drifted across the ridge, thin and far, but unmistakably deliberate. A reminder, a promise. The wolves had not forgotten, and they were not done. Winter tightened its grip on the mountains as the days shortened. Aspen had grown sturdier, more coordinated, though still far from the powerful cat he would someday become. He followed Rhea everywhere now, stumbling after her like a shadow, learning how to exist. Brutus kept a watchful eye on both of them, settling into the strange role of peacekeeper between instinct and innocence. Emily tried to convince herself the danger had eased, that perhaps the wolves had moved on to easier prey. But every few nights a distant howl drifted across the ridge, thin and sharp, a reminder that the wilderness had not forgotten what she carried away from it. Then the shift came, quiet, subtle, but undeniable. Rhea began eating more. She slept curled tightly, her paws tucked under her chest. Her movements grew slower, more deliberate. Emily noticed before anyone else. She knelt beside her one evening, pressing a careful hand along Rhea's belly. A faint firmness answered back. Life. More than one heartbeat, she was certain. "Rhea," Emily whispered, a mixture of awe and dread rising in her chest. "You're going to be a mother." The dogs sensed her worry, though they didn't know its shape. Aspen sensed it too. He watched Emily with wide, golden eyes, tilting his head when she sighed or rubbed her forehead. He didn't understand that everything was about to change, perhaps for the better, perhaps in ways none of them could survive. By the end of the week, Emily called a meeting with the local ranger station. 3 officers joined her at the cabin, stomping snow off their boots as they crowded around her small kitchen table. They reviewed policy, risk assessments, liability concerns. Aspen lay near the stove, staring at them, unaware he was the subject of every fearful hypothetical. "He's tame enough now," one ranger argued, "but when those puppies are born, their scent could trigger a predatory response. It's instinct. You can't train that out." Another ranger shook his head. "Separating him now might undo the bond he's built with the dogs. The stress alone could make him dangerous." Emily listened in silence. Every option felt wrong. Aspen had never shown aggression toward Rhea or Brutus. But puppies were different, helpless, blind, and sounding far too much like prey. She imagined Aspen's confusion, his instincts waking before his mind had the chance to understand. It wasn't his fault, yet the consequences could be fatal. Finally, the room quieted, and everyone looked at her. "You're the one living with them," the senior ranger said. "You have the final decision." Emily glanced toward Aspen. He was curled beside Rhea, resting his head on her side with the softness of a creature who had never known cruelty. She thought of the night she found him, the freezing silence, the wolves tracking her down the mountain. She thought of Brutus guarding him, of Rhea choosing to love him when nature insisted she shouldn't. "I trust them," Emily said at last. "We keep them together, but I'll stay alert. No chances taken." The rangers exchanged uneasy looks, but nodded. The decision was made. 3 days later, the sky darkened with a fast-moving storm. Heavy wind battered the cabin, rattling shingles and pushing snow against the windows. Rhea paced the rooms, restless and breathing heavily. She sought dark corners, then rejected them. Brutus followed her anxiously, whining softly. Aspen stayed close but confused, sensing something big and frightening settling over the home. When Rhea finally crawled into the storage shed behind the cabin, Emily knew the time had come. The wind howled like a living thing, shaking the shed walls as Rhea lay down, her body trembling with instinct older than memory. Brutus stood guard at the doorway, blocking Aspen each time he tried to enter. Aspen didn't understand, but he listened, lowering himself to the snow just outside the shed. The storm worsened. Snow whipped across the clearing in blinding sheets. Emily stood near the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, listening to Rhea's labored breaths. Inside the shed, new sounds emerged, tiny mewling cries that pierced the roar of the storm. Puppies? 4 of them. Brutus stepped aside long enough to help clean them, then returned to block the door again. Aspen remained where he was, his body pressed flat to the frozen ground. Snow gathered on his back, melting slowly into his warm fur, but he didn't move. Not even when Emily touched his shoulder. Hours passed. The storm raged on. Then it happened, a single, sharp cry from inside the shed, followed by a soft thud. Emily turned, heart skipping. One of the puppies had rolled away from Rhea's warmth, blind, helpless, squeaking into the cold. Before Emily could react, the wind pushed the shed door open wider, and the tiny pup tumbled toward the threshold, toward Aspen. Emily's hand flew to her tranquilizer gun. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Brutus lurched, torn between instincts. Rhea barked weakly, unable to rise. The puppy slid to a stop right against Aspen's front paw. Aspen stared down at it, bewildered. His pupils widened, his body stiffened. A mountain lion's instinct sharpened behind his eyes, an instinct written into him before birth. Emily whispered, "Please. Please don't." Aspen lifted his paw. The world seemed to hold still. Even the storm quieted outside, waiting. He brought his paw down, slowly, deliberately, curling it around the tiny pup, pulling it gently against the warmth of his chest. He lowered his head, touching his nose softly to its back, warming it with his breath. The pup let out a faint sigh and went quiet, nestling into him as though it belonged there. Brutus exhaled a deep, trembling huff. Rhea closed her eyes, accepting what she saw. Emily lowered the tranquilizer gun, her hands shaking. Aspen had made his choice, against instinct, against nature, against everything written in blood and survival. He chose family. Outside, the storm roared on, but inside the shed, something stronger than instinct took root, a bond that would change everything that followed. Morning crept over the mountains slowly, as if even the sun hesitated to disturb the fragile moment unfolding inside the shed. The storm had weakened, leaving behind a soft hush that settled over the clearing. Emily stepped out into the cold air, breath steaming, her boots crunching across the crusted snow as she approached the shed with quiet reverence. She wasn't sure what she expected to find. Part of her feared the night had been a dream. That instinct would reclaim what compassion had borrowed for a single miraculous moment. But when she opened the door, her fear dissolved. Aspen was still there, still curled protectively around the smallest puppy, its tiny body rising and falling against his chest. The other 3 puppies were nestled against Rhea, suckling peacefully, their soft mews blending with the gentle huffs of Brutus lying near the entrance. Aspen lifted his head when he saw Emily, blinking sleepily, as if he'd kept vigil through the night, and was only now remembering he was still a child himself. "You did good," Emily whispered, overcome by a warmth that spread through her chest. "Better than anyone could have imagined." Rhea stretched weakly, nuzzling Aspen's hind leg in a silent gesture of thanks. Aspen responded by nudging the puppy closer to her, careful and precise, as though aware of the fragility small life carried. Emily watched them gather around Rhea, forming a strange, beautiful circle. 2 dogs, 4 newborn pups, and a mountain lion cub who had no biological claim to them but belonged all the same. Over the next week, the household shifted into a rhythm unlike anything Emily had known. Aspen, still small but no longer fragile, shadowed the puppies with an attentiveness that softened even Brutus's stern composure. Whenever a puppy squeaked or tottered away from the nest, Aspen was the first to respond, lifting his head, ears twitching, tracking every wobbling step. He learned how to mouth gently, how to move slowly, how to measure his strength with delicate precision. These were not instincts he was born with. They were choices shaped by love and repetition. On the fourth morning, Emily walked outside to find the smallest puppy perched on Aspen's back like a misplaced explorer, paws tangled in his fur as if climbing a warm mountain. Aspen didn't move, didn't protest. He simply breathed steadily, allowing the pup to settle into the curve of his mane. Brutus lay nearby, tail tapping once in approval. Rhea slept peacefully for the first time since labor, trusting Aspen to keep watch. It was the kind of moment no wildlife documentary could stage, no accident lawyer could argue, no insurance policy could measure. A moment that simply defied the rules everyone believed governed the natural world. As the days passed, Aspen's role expanded. When a gust of wind pushed cold air into the cabin, he positioned himself between the draft and the pups. When they play-fought too close to the Eibach fireplace, he gently herded them away with his body. Rhea and Brutus watched him with a mixture of respect and acceptance, as though they had appointed him the guardian of the youngest members of their pack. But the wolves had not forgotten. It was late afternoon when Emily noticed the tracks, fresh, sharp, circling the perimeter of the clearing. Aspen noticed too. His ears flicked, nostrils widening as he caught the scent of the predators who had once hunted him. A low, uncertain rumble rose in his throat. Brutus stiffened beside him. Rhea stepped forward, her posture shifting from gentle mother to vigilant protector. Emily held her breath as two wolves stepped out from the tree line, shoulders sleek beneath winter coats. They stared at the cabin, at the shed, at the place where their stolen prey now lived among creatures willing to fight for him. Aspen didn't advance, but something in him changed. He stood taller, tail low but steady, body angled to shield the shed behind him. An instinct older than fear stirred in him, not the instinct of a predator, but of a protector. Brutus moved to his side. Rhea joined him. Their formation was imperfect, mismatched in size and species, yet unified by a bond powerful enough to challenge the wild itself. The wolves held their gaze a moment longer, then retreated into the trees, each step deliberate, a warning left behind in the snow. But the pack inside the clearing held firm, and Emily felt a pulse of pride she knew she would carry for the rest of her life. Spring approached slowly. The puppies grew, opening their eyes to a world in which their uncle was a mountain lion who let them chew his tail and tumble across his back. Aspen grew too, shedding the helplessness of winter for the steady confidence of youth. His muscles filled out, his stance matured, yet his gentleness never faded. Then came the morning that sealed everything into memory. Emily stepped outside with her coffee, the sky painted with dawn's gold. What she saw made her stop mid-breath. On the snow-covered trail leading away from the cabin, a small procession moved with quiet purpose. Brutus in front, walking with the calm authority of a seasoned guardian. Rhea beside him, her posture lighter now that her puppies were strong. Aspen behind them, bigger than both yet still choosing the place of Omega, the humble follower. And trailing after him, 4 clumsy pups, stepping where he stepped, looking to him as though he were the mountain itself. They moved together in perfect rhythm, a family created not by blood, but by choice. Emily lifted her camera, hands trembling with awe. She knew even then that no photograph, no viral moment, no insurance brochure or personal loan advertisement promising protection or security could ever capture what she saw. The miracle of a predator choosing love over instinct, choosing to protect instead of harm. As the sun climbed higher, Aspen paused and looked back at her. His golden eyes held no wild hunger, no fear, no confusion. Only belonging. Emily smiled as the pack continued down the trail, a fragile, beautiful contradiction etched against the morning light. She whispered the truth aloud, letting it settle into the air around her. "Family is what we protect," she said softly, "not what we're born into." And on that quiet morning in the Rockies, a mountain lion cub, saved by 2 Rottweilers, shaped by a storm, bound by loyalty, proved it beyond any doubt.